DW is on the ground. He's been talking to Ukrainian athletes. It's a mixture of extraordinary joy, but of course, a bitterness and sadness as well, because of the athletes who unfortunately were supposed to be at the Olympics, but cannot, either physically, because they may not be able to travel, or unfortunately, because many of them have been killed by invading Russian forces over the last couple of years. DW, welcome back. What's it like now?
Yeah. First of all, Jonathan, I'm so excited to be doing a live broadcast from Paris 2024 because you are the voice of ration and reason. First of all, there is enthusiasm and joy and this unusual Olympic spirit which you feel as you see people from all these different nations of the world gathered together. Absent are Russians. Yes, true, there are a couple of dozen people that are part of the AIN, which is the so-called neutral. We know they're not neutral, but they're the so-called neutral athletes, but you don't see them. You don't see Russian flags. And what's really stunning is as of this morning, they had won only one medal. The Russians won one medal, and that was in tennis doubles. I'm not sure what happened over the last couple of hours, but they're really not a presence here at all. What about Ukraine? Ukraine is dominating. I don't know how to make this any more clear to people. There are 204 Olympic national committees that are represented here of the 208 in the world. Of those 204 nation Olympic committees, Ukraine is at the 17th or the 18th place. So you just have to think about that for a second. This is a war-torn country. This is a country whose gymnasiums have been destroyed by Russian bombs. These athletes have to train outside of their own country. And they're 17th or 18th. They're ahead of Poland. They're ahead of the close to 1 billion people living in India. They are dominating here, and it's absolutely incredible, already with 7 medals. And today I was at Ukraine House, and I spent a very good portion of my day just sitting down with the Ukrainian Olympians. That was phenomenal. I had almost 45 minutes to an hour with Yaroslava, who won gold in the high jump. What a delightful woman she is. Absolutely incredible. A patriot to the core. So, Jonathan, to just put it the best way I can, it's this strange circumstance where there is ecstatic joy, and yet the same people that are experiencing ecstatic joy get text messages about some of their friends being killed back in Ukraine by Russians. Imagine that. Imagine being on a world stage, global gold, but you're hearing about the tragedies back at home. That's the weird circumstances we live in today that the world needs to understand.
And this is the life of every single Ukrainian. I know, as you do a lot, where you are and where you normally hang out. I know you travel an awful lot. And there's a lot of Ukrainians in London, Oxford, all around. And of course, as soon as you sit down for any amount of time, you'll talk about all sorts of things. But usually at the start of any conversation, Ukrainians will exchange information. Who has been captured, who is still being held captive, who is missing, who's been injured, and who's been killed. And it's almost like it's an intense emotional ritual people go through of exchanging extraordinary amounts of information about exactly that, and trying to figure out, who they know in common.
You're completely right. I have to remind myself, I'm very enthusiastic about Ukraine. I'm passionate about this subject. I believe it is the existential crisis of our generation. And today I was introduced to, I would say, a very important woman in Ukrainian athletics. I won't mention her name for this broadcast purposes, but as I was diving into the conversation with her, I started sharing things. Back in the United States, we've had the privilege of spending a lot of time with Ukrainian pilots training on the F-16. We have very deep friendships. And as I'm sharing, I'm realizing she's about to burst into tears. And I just dial it back because everyone is on the verge of emotional explosion. And imagine how it's heightened when the whole world, there are hundreds of millions of people watching Ukraine win gold. The fencing, the ladies, we didn't expect it. It was possible, but we didn't think it was going to happen. And Olga Karlin, wow, did she perform, leading those ladies into an Olympic gold history that was absolutely phenomenal. And Yaroslava, when I interviewed her today, Jonathan, and I was among a press crew of about 5 different outlets that were there. We spent 45 minutes to an hour with this woman. She was indefatigable in speaking with us. She was 100%, and constantly she would begin her comments by saying, first of all, I'm a defender of Ukraine. That's my job, is to defend my country. Then I'm Olympian. But first of all, I'm defending my job. And very emotionally, I'm sure she's done 100 interviews, 1,000 interviews, but even now, tears well up in her eyes when she talks about her personal home being bombed, wanting to go home. Her friends, the 400 who never had a chance to be here because they were murdered by an unjust, wicked invasion on the part of one of the great, largest sovereign nations of the world, Russia, and its despotic goals. It affects these people on the most deepest and personal levels. And these Olympians feel it because they're on the world stage. The pressure on them, Jonathan, the pressure. They're not just here to win gold. They're here to be spokeswomen and spokesmen for the nation of Ukraine. There's not another nation in the world that has that issue. Maybe you'd argue Israel, maybe a couple of others, but no one the way that Ukraine is in that position.
And I mean, this is something which they must be acutely aware of, is they're not simply competing when they have the Ukrainian flag, when they're standing on the podium, when they're standing with other athletes about to begin whatever event it is. Just by being there, they're asserting the fact that Ukraine is a sovereign country, the fact that it is a separate identity from Russia, this fact that it deserves to carry on existing, not being expunged. They must carry this idea that they are representing their very right to exist every moment they take part in something like the Olympic Games.
That's spot on correct. And words almost identical that were said to me today. I was with 3 Olympians. I was with Michaela Kokin, whose name I did not do justice to, but who was our hammer thrower and who came away with bronze. And I was also with the Olympian who came up with bronze after Yaroslava in the high jump, the 3 of us at the Ukrainian house with other press. And you kind of have to understand, these are athletes. Some of them, in the case of Yaroslava, she's 22 years old, but she has to be articulate. She has to be able to speak directly to an international audience, and they know that. Is there anybody training them on how to do that? No. They're simply doing it from their heart and their soul. It's difficult for us, I think, to appreciate the pressure, the totality of the pressure and the enormity of the emotional reality that they go through. But that's exactly what's happening as you've observed.
What more can we expect here? I mean, I will ask in a minute about the athletes who couldn't attend, but extraordinary success so far. I mean, one could say that it's success simply being there and taking part in the circumstances. But what more do you think are we going to see in the coming days? Because there are many Ukrainians in many events that are still slated to take place.
We have an opportunity for more gold medals. I think we are essentially guaranteed at least 1 medal in middleweight boxing from Ukraine. Whether that's going to be a gold or silver or a bronze is unclear yet, but we're going to get a medal there. Assuming he shows up at the event and he performs, we're getting another medal. There are other medal opportunities in track and field which are possible. The 2 big ones that we were just, extraordinarily excited about were fencing and also what's now called athletics, which is the high jump. But there are more coming up. And I think when we're done here this week, we may see Ukraine coming out with somewhere between 8 and 14 total medals. It's possible it could be more than that. But the critical thing is they will have medaled at a time in the Olympic events where the Olympics takes place over 2 weeks. And they've captured 2 major gold medals in the first part and the middle part. I think we may see one more coming up later on. It's like a hat trick. I don't know how to put it any other way. It's like they've cinched this special athletic message to the world, and they're bookends on what's happening here. I'll tell you one thing that's interesting, Jonathan, that I think your listeners might be interested in. In fact, I'm standing right now, we're broadcasting from what you could call the Village of the Nations. This is the athletic center where all the major nations that choose to do so have huge houses where they invite people to come in and to visit and to experience their culture. Well, the Ukrainian house, it's called the Ukrainian house, which is maybe 500 meters from where I'm standing, which I just recently left. Okay, you have to have security to get in there for obvious reasons. But once you get in there, you meet, children from Ukraine. You meet moms and dads that have come there to watch on the big screen only Ukrainian athletes perform over and over again. There were some great track and field events today that took place. One of our heroes didn't make it, but she performed great doing hurdles today from Ukraine. And you watch as the children are watching her on the big screen. They can't afford the $700 athletic tickets, so they go to the Ukrainian house. Well, now imagine in this little house, this is not for the mainstream press. These are for people of Ukraine that care. In come the gold medalists, and they're hugging the little girls. They're signing the books. Here are these children, they go home to a reality in Ukraine of death. And here their heroes are being shown to 1 billion people. And they're patting them on the head and giving them hugs and signing their books. It is phenomenal. And that's one part I would say of the heart and soul of these Olympians is they have such a connection with the people of Ukraine and with the children. There's real love there. I'll put it this way. Nothing here is about self. Nothing is about selfishness. Nothing is about them. It's all about my country and our people. That's how they talk.
And they must also be conscious. I mean, that's a beautiful image just to react to that. And of course, given what these children are going through, what they've gone through, those memories are going to be imprinted on their lives, but also perhaps create a template for their own ambition, their own resilience, their own strength in later life.
I think that's very true. For part of our week here, my son Honor, who is executive producer for Ukraine Story podcast, and I were traveling with two world-class Olympic champions from Ukraine who are friends, both ladies. One is a tremendous champion in table tennis. The other is a world champion in football and beach soccer. And her name is, the former of whom is named Anastasia Klipachenko. And one of the comments she made over and over again is that our battle here is that we find the children and we put hope in their hearts and we use athletics to help them to understand victory, understand strength. So I would say there's a big push here amongst Ukrainians. Tomorrow I'm doing an interview, in fact, with some leadership in Kyiv who are focused on helping the children of Ukraine through athletics to have a victory-oriented mindset, to experience victory and to experience hope. So there's something about athletics which just brings people together and brings out the best and also teaches them a certain element of discipline, which I think is helpful for them in this time of warfare and conflict.
And that's, I mean, not to turn this into a simplistic statement, but that seems to be an incredible contrast. The idea that the athletes are trying to put hope into people's hearts, whereas what we see coming from Russian leadership, Russian media, it's all about putting hate, fear, envy, loathing into people's hearts, and especially children as well. We can't help think, but those children who have been taken from Ukraine to Russia are being brainwashed to distrust and hate and loathe and not really have any aspiration for the future beyond those negative emotions.
I think we really need to be honest about something. The message which has come from the Kremlin and tragically has been reiterated 1,000 times over by the Tucker Carlson right in America is a message of detestation and hatred for the people of Ukraine. And this is not an exaggeration. It's actual detestation and hatred. It's a form of psychological cultural genocide, which is communicated constantly. Oh, you're not really a people. You're really Russians. There is no such thing as Ukraine. We made up Ukraine. You're inferior. You belong to us. You do what we say. It's a slave master mentality, which is it's diabolical. And the Ukrainians are such a strong, independent people. It has the opposite effect on them. To them, it makes them strong. To them, it makes them defiant. But then, Jonathan, you sit down with these people, like Yaroslava today, who I was with for close to an hour. And, you know, this woman should be talking about how great it is to jump to break world records. And she does that, but she's practically welling up in tears talking about the fact that she has friends in the athletic community. She told the story. I have it on video. If folks watch later on our channel, they'll be able to see it. But she talks about the fact that she has athletic friends who say, oh, is the war still going on? What's happening? Are there still things happening? And Yaroslava said, I have to take pictures out of my iPhone to show that there's nothing left of this town. It's totally destroyed. I have to show them pictures of dead bodies so they realize this is what's happening. This is an Olympian, a gold medalist, world champion, world record setter. And she simply wants people to understand, my country is being raped. Do you understand? And she's the sweetest thing you can imagine. She says it as nicely as possible, but you see the tears and you see the heart, and you just want to stop and cry. It's very emotional.
And this seems like the right time to ask this as well, because amongst all the joy, these Olympians must also carry with them the idea that there are many, many hundreds of athletes who could have potentially competed in these games. They could have put themselves forward and potentially been selected for the national team. They're not here because they've either been killed in their capacity as civilians or because they joined the army and have been killed by Russians on the front.
Jonathan, every Olympian who spoke today, there were three of them, addressed that issue. That is present in their mind. It's as if you were here in a world of ghosts. So this year, the Ukrainian Olympic team has mustered 140 people. In the past, it was 170. It was more than that. I think they all believe that if there was no war going on, that they would have had 220 qualified Olympians to be here. So there's 140. All right, that's a decent showing, but it's not 220. Why are there 140? There's 140 because literally 490 of the best and brightest athletes in Ukraine have been murdered by Russians. I don't know how to say that any more strongly. 490 plus of the best and the brightest, many of whom would have, or some of whom would have been qualified for the Olympics, are not here because they're dead. I remember reading a book about a great author from the early part of the 20th century who made the comment that during World War I, there was an entire generation of the best and the brightest who died. They died. They were gone. Like 1 million people that should have been here were gone. This is the story of athletics in Ukraine. And it's very significant. And, you know, I want to say this carefully because I don't think we need any hyperbole in the discussion of Ukraine and Russia. The facts speak for themselves. I've done a lot of work on Russian atrocities. I hope to do more in the future. And one of the things I realize is the complete disrespect for humanity on the part of the Russian military. It's not just unconscionable, it's unbelievable. It's an institutional problem. And I was looking at Yaroslava today and just realizing, had she been captured by the Russians, her fate would have been unspeakably horrible. And here is this precious girl who is the best of the best of the best in the history of the world. And she would have been treated as less than human had she been captured by the Russians. This has to stop. Oh, one other thing I want to mention, Jonathan. In one of the interviews today we did with, and I'm speaking of Yaroslava because we spent the most time and because she's the most famous of the Ukrainian Olympians along with Olga Karlin. But one of the comments she made was, we are not looking for a peace plan that partitions Ukraine. We'll be fighting the Russians forever. We want peace, and the only way we'll have peace is total victory. Think about this. 22-year-old girl just won the gold medal. What is she talking about? We don't want the Trump peace plan. We don't want Europeans or Americans to come in and tell us we have to give away our hard-fought land. We actually want to win, and that's the people we are. And when we come to the Olympics and we show that we're going to take Olympic gold, that's part of the spirit we're communicating to the world. We are fighting to win, not for second place.
And of course, that's incredibly important because there is no idea, when people talk of peace, and there's been an uptick of those kind of conversations recently. I think anyone who understands Russian history, anyone who understands the mindset of the Russian regime, there is no concept of a permanent peace. There is no concept of a treaty. There is simply strength and there is weakness. Any
That's right.
cessation of hostilities is simply a pause to rearm. And again, that's a hard idea to take, but it's one that can't be far away from these Olympians' minds as well. That their country's been at war for more than 10 years now, and if the right assistance isn't provided, I mean, it could be going on for another 10, but the price of that is
And
inconceivable.
the price is inconceivable. I think there are a lot of Americans in the media and in the popular culture from different perspectives who have this idea. They're projecting their own values and their own perspective on life and war on the Russians. So, for example, they say, well, I would never cut off someone's head. I wouldn't remove the internal organs of a prisoner and sell it on the market, something I mentioned because there's evidence that that's being done now by Russians to Ukrainians. Well, who would do that? No one decent would do that. We wouldn't just go into a town and rape little boys and girls and set up green quarters for target practice to kill entire families. And yet that is exactly what the Russians did in Bucha and in various other places. And I think they think, well, I wouldn't do that, so why would they do it? And what they should be thinking is, how would Genghis Khan handle things? How would, Stalin handle things? How would the Waffen SS handle things under certain circumstances? Because the value system is comprehensively different. And when you try to superimpose the ethics of your Ivy League college on the Kremlin, you're going to be sorely, sorely mistaken.
Well, we'll end with a question on Ukraine. Before we get to that, here's a penultimate question. And people will say, well, hang a second, this is the Olympics. There's no room here for war and conflict, etc. And we understand the Ukrainians, they are at war, but, they need to park that at the door and just focus on the sport. What would you say to that? Because, my impression is that there is no distinction between war and sport in the Russian mind. In terms of the Russian regime, sport is another way of projecting state power, projecting the influence, power, wealth, etc., status of the state. There's no division between those things. So how would you answer this idea of trying to keep sport and war apart?
Well, I begin with the comment that a tremendous, grievous error was made in 1936 when the world went to Berlin and they experienced the Berlin Olympics under the Nazis, who expressly used it as a tool of propaganda for the world. One of the problems with mindless people going to the Olympics and thinking, oh, we're all a bunch of happy people here playing games, is that it ends up creating the type of isolationist who supported the SS, who supported Hitler, who supported the rise of Germany in 1936. The 1936 Olympics is a lesson to the world of what not to do and of how totalitarian states use the Olympics for its own power. Let's talk about Russia. Do we remember the not too long ago Olympics that took place that Vladimir Putin superintended, which was an incredible homage to Stalin and the Soviet Union? He understood exactly what he was doing then, but more importantly now, when we think of Russian athletes, they're different than other athletes. They're not American athletes. And American athletes have to look for sponsors. They have to fight for money. The difficulties of being an athlete in America are just astonishing. Now, let's talk about one of these smaller countries where they have almost no support for being athletes. What about Russia? It's basically a division of the state. Athletics is part of their military operation. It's a propaganda front for people. And they work with many of these athletes who are members of the military, or they formally support the military. Look, if you're a Russian athlete and you're successful, you support the Putin regime. It's as simple as that. You do not move forward unless in some way you pay homage to Moscow and to the Kremlin. It doesn't happen. And Moscow understands this and they push it. There's absolutely no neutrality whatsoever. And that's why when Olga Karlin, over the last year, won the international competition in saber, She wasn't about to shake the hand of the Russian that she beat. Instead, she did something which, by the way, I'm a fencer myself, and this is legal in post-COVID fencing competitions. She put the sword forward to the Russian competitor, which is an alternative to shaking the Russian competitor's hand. That competitor sat there, had a temper tantrum, and pushed for the committee to deny her the gold medal. Thankfully, it was ultimately reversed, and that policy was changed. But these are the tactics of the Russians: temper tantrums, manipulation, propaganda, because the Olympics are probably the greatest state indoctrination tool for Moscow that they have. So their absence here is incredibly welcome. And the fact that they're not here and we're not seeing Russian flags flying around, I can't describe the relief it is, I think, to everyone that's here this year.
As we always try to, let's end with Ukraine and with the focus on Ukraine. We are going to do more episodes. We are going to have more in depth, and I know you're filming footage, which is going to come onto Silicon Curtain, so people can hear some of these stories directly. I'm incredibly excited by that. But what is there to look forward to over the next couple of days from the Ukrainian athletes, and what are you looking forward to seeing, and the sort of interactions you may have through the course of the remaining few days of the Olympic Games?
I think that, well, first of all, we want to see some more medals in track and field. And there are other events where wrestling, boxing, and various other events where we have the possibility to see Ukrainians shine. And every time they do, we want a camera in their face. I don't know how to put it any other way. We want to be right there with them. We want to get their reactions, because there is not a Ukrainian competing here that isn't first and foremost thinking about the defense of their country. It's as simple as that. They're in the middle of war. And every time they're in the front stage, the first thing they want to say is, in fact, I found this quite beautiful, if I may say so. The first thing said by Yaroslava was, the first thing I want to do is thank all the defenders of Ukraine for allowing me to be here. I want to thank all the soldiers. I wouldn't be here except for those soldiers that are defending Ukraine. Pause and think about that. Everyone else is glad because Coca-Cola sponsored them, or Nike, or something like that. She's glad because a bunch of people are dying for her on the front line to allow her to train outside of her country, to come here and somehow find a little bit of mental peace and physical strength to show the world what Ukraine can do. It's absolutely stunning. I'm so proud of these people. So in the final days, I want to hear more of those stories. I want to see some more medals coming up. I think we're going to see more medals. And I think I'd love to see Ukraine go from even 18th to, say, 16th or 15th. And just to recognize that for a country their size, in the middle of war, with gyms that have been destroyed, to have such a strong showing, this is the Ukrainian heart. This is Ukrainian defiance. They will not quit. They're a beautiful people, and they are here to win.
Slava Ukraini.
Slava Ukraini. Heroam Slava.
DW, absolutely fantastic speaking to you. So much passion and energy there. That is clearly, being transmitted via the people you're speaking to. Good luck with the remaining couple of days. I hope you capture some of that emotion, spark, and the stories from the athletes. For now, though, thank you so much for sharing these impressions.
Great to be with you, and we'll look forward to some more broadcasts from the 2024 Paris Olympics with Silicon Curtain and with you, Jonathan.